We're live.
Okay, thanks. I'd like to call to order the Audit Committee meeting for the City of New York on June 20th, 2023. And I'd like to call upon the secretary to do a roll call.
Morning, everyone. Michael Spitzer, Chair.
Present.
Larry Angelo.
Present.
Mark Kaplan.
Present.
Marsha Van Wagner.
Present.
Representing Mayor Eric Adams, Paul Timus.
Present.
Representing Controller Brad Lander, Jacqueline Thompson.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Before we begin, I'd just like to mention for the record that we're still in the window of 30 days from our last meeting, and we are still able to meet remotely by Zoom according to the mayor's resolution. So that's just for the record. At this time, I'd like to have a motion to accept the minutes of the meeting of May 24th, 2023.
I move.
Second.
And okay, thank you. And if anybody has any comments, please just forward them on to Katrina Stauffer, the secretary.
Okay.
So at this time, I'd like to call upon the members of the New York City Deferred Compensation Plan. If you could introduce yourselves as well as anybody that is with you. I believe Beth, that's you.
Yes, good morning. My name is Beth Kushner. I'm the Deputy Director of Administration for the New York City Deferred Compensation Plan. Joining me is our Chief Accountant, Mai Chow, who's trying to connect. Joan Barrow, who was with us for over 30 years, retired in the middle of last year. So the transition to Mai was very smooth, and I would like to introduce her once she goes on camera, but otherwise she is joining. I also would like to introduce, we're joined by our auditors from the firm of CLA. Chris Rogers is the Managing Principal Engagement Partner, and Jim Kreiser is the Principal for Business Risk and IT Services. Chris's group did the financial audit, and Jim's group did the IT and cyber assessment report, which was also sent to you. At 12/31/2022, the net position in the plan was $26.2 billion, which was a decrease of $4 billion over the prior year. All of the investment options, except for the stable income fund, had negative returns for the calendar year ending 12/31/22. They all met their, or were very close to meeting their benchmarks for the year. So with that, I'll open it up to any questions you may have for myself, Mai, Chris, or Jim.
Question I have is, how did the fund did they improve or a further decline for the first quarter of 23?
For the first quarter of 23, yes, they did improve. I think it was a much better. I didn't bring the performance report from our last board meeting, but I do believe that they did do better. I can follow up with that information if you're interested.
Well, if you look at the two preceding years, there were good good year that got wiped out by the next bad year
2022 is not a good year
for anybody.
for anybody. I can get you the information on the first quarter of 2023. And I can send that over to you.
Anytime you send something, please send it to the secretary, Katrina Stauffer, and Katrina will distribute it to all the audit committee members.
Understood. Okay.
I have a question about the benchmarking. So you have a custom benchmark, and I guess I'm accustomed to seeing benchmarks that are some identifiable fund or something that somebody could independently look up and compare the benchmark performance. And I'm wondering, how there's a way to be more transparent about what the benchmark is based on.
There is information about the benchmarks on page, which page is that? Custom benchmarks. Okay, so we do have custom benchmarks because the funds are all white label and they're separate accounts. So they are, they have guidelines that the board, we have an investment policy that the board and the consultants work together to provide, and the custom benchmarks are because of the funds, like for the target date funds, those are made up of the underlying investments. So they are not off the shelf. So they have to do a custom benchmark in that case. The performance information that we provide on our website does have has the benchmark for the participant to see. Just trying to find inside the report. Here we go. On page 58, you'll see like the bond fund, the benchmark is the Barclays US aggregate. The equity index fund, the benchmark is the S&P 500 index. The social responsible fund is the MSCI ACWI SRI index. So we do put them out here for them to see, but in particular, the portfolios do have separate custom benchmarks because of the makeup of the funds.
Okay, and I guess, is there like just an explanation of that anywhere, or?
In the plan materials, the enrollment materials,
Mhm.
not inside the ACFRA per se.
Okay. Okay, all right, thanks.
Let me make a minor editorial comment. The city of New York should have a capital T, and no matter where you go, it should be done that way, just as a little tiny thing. But in the annual report, there's a safeguarded against loss.
What
That-
page, Mark?
That's the page, I don't know what it is, page 5, I guess. Wait a minute, I can't take off my glasses. Page 9, there's a statement here that's maybe a little off. It says that the safeguarded against loss. Now, this is probably what you're talking about is a bad thing rather than a market issue. But we look at the language, it's safeguarding against loss.
I
And
think we're saying is the assets of the system are safeguarded against loss.
well, they're not.
Okay,
They're safeguarded against bad behavior, but not against the market loss.
okay, we'll clarify that.
And then there's another thing in this letter, which I wouldn't like. And the last sentence says, these individuals ensure the continued availability. They don't insure. That's an insurance company thing. If I were one of them, I would want to soften that language.
Okay,
I mean, there's little bits and pieces of grammar, but those are substantive issues.
thank you. We'll make that change.
Mark, if you could just get them to Kat and then she'll.
I'll send it in
Okay,
when
Thank
I get to the office.
so the city of New York, we kind of go back and forth every year. So the should be a capital T.
Capital T, all the
Got
way. Now, if we can get into the details here, on page, I've got to get new glasses. Page 11, there's a referral, your combined deferral election cannot exceed 75% of what?
Are you looking at the deferrals?
It's in the maximum deferral paragraph. Third,
75% of the active participants' includable income as defined by the code.
well, that's the first 75%. The second 75% doesn't have the qualifying language.
If you choose to contribute to both the 457 and the 401k, your combined deferral election cannot exceed. That's the amount that they elect in the system. or on the paper form.
I understand. It's just
Okay, we can clarify that as well.
now. I'm just turning pages which I have scratched, so forgive me. A lot of these. Oh, there's a capital T someplace. There's a reference in here, I think, to who you use to help you deal with the portfolios. Am I right?
Do you have a page number that you're referring to?
Looking for it, so give me a minute. I turn the pages.
The plans consultants we work with Mercer Consulting. Are you talking about for the,
And when you say consultants, are they, what do they consult on?
the investment consultants? The plan has 3 consultants,
What-
NEPC, Mercer, and Milliman.
What-
And
what-
they assist with investment searches, manager searches. They report out on the performance of the funds. And
So-
they also help manage, help with the portfolios, with the when it winds down, the portfolio path.
So these people are not the money managers.
No, they are not money managers. They are investment consulting firms that the board has contracts with.
Okay, well, you might want to clarify that because sometimes people use that word for different things.
Okay.
Then there's a reference on page 41 that says you have certain amounts of money exceeding FDIC insured limits. So what I'm accustomed to seeing is a statement that when that happens, that somebody's watching over the credit of the banks for the unsecured portion, or else you get it collateralized. And I don't see anything here with that kind of wording, and I assume you have somebody watching over where you have the money that's unsecured.
Well, the board is responsible and the consulting firms are reporting out, checking with the Bank of New York, who's the plan's custodian, as well as the record keeper, which is Voya Financial.
No,
So-
but you have a couple $100,000 uninsured. And I'm accustomed to seeing a statement either that they've been collateralized, or if not insured, at least somebody monitors the banks.
Okay, Chris, do you have anything to add to that with your experience?
No, other than management puts in place a policy on any uninsured deposits that they check the Veribank system to make sure that the rating of that bank is appropriate in the circumstance.
That's what I'm accustomed to seeing in the footnote.
Are you
Okay.
really? I've actually never seen that, but I mean, there's nothing wrong with putting that in there. So I think that's something that you could add for next year, Beth.
Okay,
Okay,
thank you.
hold on a second, I'm flipping pages. Give me a lot of interesting data here. Wonder who reads it.
Hope someone does. Besides us.
Yeah, some of us read the data and skip the words, it's just depending on what your preference is.
If I couldn't find the capital V's, it'd be very uninteresting.
Well, the numbers are all bigger than the words.
Yep.
They're big, they're big.
Well, it was, I think, a good idea to show the performance of the funds over a period of time, because if you looked at it over the 3-year period, it came out about even. It's my recollection. And that's better than somebody picking this up and passing out if he only saw 1 year.
Yes, we have the 1, the 3, and the 5-year. That's correct.
Yeah, well, in particular, so that's the whole idea.
Does anybody else have any comments or questions?
I'll pass this. Who should I send this to, Mike?
Pat?
Okay,
Katrina,
okay.
if there are no more questions or comments, I'd like to thank you for coming to this morning's session, and have a good summer.
Thank you so much.
And have
Thank
a
you very
better
much.
year than last year.
So far, it's a good start, so thank you.
At
Take
least
care,
we don't have any fires from Canada right now.
Hopefully that'll stay that way. Thank you so much.
Okay,
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. The next item on the agenda is the report to the mayor and city council on city controller audit operations.
Morning. My name is Maura Hayes Chafe. I'm the Deputy Controller for Audit. And before I make my few comments, I'd like to introduce my staff. Peggy Horning is here, Assistant Comptroller for Financial Audit.
Could I interrupt for 1 second? Peggy, were you
Sure.
once somebody that looked to get involved with the New York City Board of Ed years ago? When I was chairman of that audit committee?
Maybe, you'll have to be a little bit more.
I remember somebody
I've only
telling
been
us
doing
what your,
audits.
I remember what somebody told us your name stood for, and it stuck in my mind all these years.
I would imagine yeah, there aren't too many Faggy Hornings around here, yeah.
No, there's only one Faggy Horning that I know of.
That's true, Mike, yeah.
Yes, she's an original in many ways, and we're very grateful for her presence. We're very lucky to have her.
Yeah, thank you, Maura.
We're also joined by Edward Carey, who's the Assistant Comptroller for Management Audits, Marianne Mullaney, who's Executive Director for Special Audit Projects. Edward, Feggy, and Marianne collectively are responsible really for the output from this department, so I thank them. We are also joined by Nicole Simon, who's the Executive Director of Operations, and her group is responsible, among other things, for collecting recommendations, status responses, and also compiling the annual report. So I don't know if you've noticed, but we changed the format of the annual report considerably this time. The charter allows us to report only major audits, so we did that this time. There were only a small number of audits that were eliminated or not included in the report. The report also is reorganized, so it's listed by financial and programmatic impact, and within that by subject. The reason we did that was in several instances, there was more than one audit related on a related subject, and we wanted to be able to see those collectively in one place. Okay. There is an increased focus on implementation of recommendations. I think I've spoken about this with this committee before, but beginning with audits that were issued in January 2022, instead of a kind of once and done approach to implementation, we are tracking, and we are reaching out 3 to 4 times a year to agencies to ask about any recommendations, in particular that they committed to implementing but had not yet at the last check. So these are now made public. The results of that follow-up is public in a recommendations tracker. The link to the recommendations tracker is included in the annual report. Of the recommendations issued in fiscal 22, agencies agreed to about 67% and partially agreed with 9%. As of today, about 56% of the recommendations have been implemented and other 7% partially implemented. That's a pretty good success rate from our perspective. The recommendations are implementation is really what shows whether or not the audits have had an impact. So there are several fiscal findings in this set of audits. Cumulatively, 10 audits resulted in the identification of 278 million in potential savings to New York City. That's a mix of actual overpayments, foregone or unnecessary expenditures, recoupments, and recommended recoupments. The 2 largest impacts from this fiscal year 22 were the audit of DOE's Medicaid claims, which really found that DOE failed to maximize its claims to the federal government. That audit accounted for $188 million in savings. EDC and the ferry audit resulted in another $67 million in potential savings had EDC appropriately administered the contract. In addition to savings, the audit also identified $224 million in ferry-related expenditures that were not reported as such. Fare subsidies were inaccurately reported and significantly underestimated. And we were very pleased to note that the Adams administration responded to the report almost immediately with fare changes, and also the issuance of a new RFP. There were several audits with significant operational impacts. We identified risks, systematic weaknesses, and lack of planning. For example, the COVID report, which was a special report rather than an audit, found that there had been very little pandemic planning and that there were serious consequences for the city. I highlight this one because while COVID may be under control, the city continues to face emergencies. For example, we're in the middle of a set of emergencies related to asylum seekers, and the lack of planning and ability to implement with significant safeties in place are really, it's a really significant problem that the city continues to face. So, you know, you have the report for yourself. You can read it and have read it, I assume. The only other thing I wanted to mention, and I included a press release for the Liebe case. The last time I appeared before you, there were a lot of questions about fraud, and I answered very vaguely that there were several fraud cases. There were a few fraud cases pending. This is one. The Liebe case came out of a welfare fund, and you know, it started with an audit several years ago. The audit, the principal refused to participate in the audit. That led to referrals to DOI that was subsequently referred to SDNY, and we're really pleased to say that the criminal prosecution has now been completed with positive results. Marianne Mullaney gave testimony on our behalf, and you know, she received a huge amount of praise from observers who indicated that she really performed more like an expert witness than an auditor. So we're really pleased with that outcome. And even though it's outside the scope of the fiscal 22, I did want to flag it for you. So as we go forward, you will see some changes, I think, in the subject matter chosen of audits. We have currently 50 pending audits. There's a very heavy focus on participation by residents. We would like to ensure that New York City residents are asked where it's feasible to do so, how they feel about particular programs. We think that's as valid as independent audit testing, right? They complement each other. In many cases, I think we'll find that the audit testing is echoed by what the residents themselves indicate is going on. So that's it for me in terms of my comments. Happy to answer any questions, and Edward, Marianne, and Feggy are also here to assist with that.
Thank you. You know, in reading this, what I guess I can, you know, I felt like a lot of times you'll make recommendations and they won't even answer you, some of the agencies.
It's
What
true.
was also troubling was the community boards. Of the 59, I think I did a quick count, like 27 didn't even get back to you.
Yeah.
What happens in these cases?
In these cases, well, first of all, I think all of you are aware that although we have oversight authority, it's limited, right? If an agency refuses to respond or responds negatively, all we can do is comment on that and ask them over time whether or not they've changed their minds. And often they do. We often find that auditors, that agencies who've said no, they won't implement, have actually implemented when we conduct further follow-up. I think the overall percentage of folks who refuse to respond or don't comment is relatively small. It's under 4%. But I take your point about the community boards. As you know, there are 59 community boards. We do them in 5 audits for really for reasons of feasibility. It's almost impossible to conduct 59 audits focused on community boards who, whilst important, receive very little funding overall. So we do them by borough. And whilst all meetings are held with all boroughs present, all community boards present, if they choose not to respond, there's very little we can do about it in actual terms.
I guess my trouble is that I sit on and have been in public company boards where the audit committee members usually sit on the compensation committee. And the discipline is you have a lousy audit report, forget your bonus or things like that. What discipline can be exerted over these various enterprises?
I think by our office, very little. You know, it's one of those truisms that the city comptroller has oversight authority to investigate and audit, review, analyze, but not force change. That unfortunately sits within the authority of the mayor. So if the mayor's office chooses not to force change, there's very little we can do about it in practical terms.
I don't like to be frustrated that way. Is there something, we have a mayor's representative on this committee. Is there something that can be done translating discipline based upon the audit reports?
If I can speak to that, I'm looking at my first round at O&B. Two of those agencies were in my portfolio, the Department of Education and the community boards. The Department of Education had a real problem, as we all remember, with Medicaid.
Yeah.
Getting Medicaid, getting proper reimbursement. They made some mistakes, and for whatever reason, that led them to decide, well, they should never try and get Medicaid reimbursement again. And I must have spent 5 years in my first round there, and all of the 4 years of the 3 years I was there in my second round, desperately trying to get them to at least attempt to do obtain some reimbursement.
Mhm.
And we went to the state and tried to get them to push it along. But the problem you have here is that these are mandated services. And of course, the children will get the services as they should. You then have a problem with how do you discipline an agency that won't even make an attempt to do part of their job, because they don't need to. This funding will come to them. These services will be paid for. And as it turns out, if you don't even attempt a Medicaid reimbursement, it's the city that pays for it. It's a very tough thing because, what do? We tried, threatening a cut in their budget. It's just very difficult. I think the community boards you might have a bit of a better time with. I mean, maybe it's up to the mayor's folks to start to talk with the borough presidents. And that might help. But I'm open to anybody who can tell me any way we can get the DOE to do their Medicaid claiming.
Basically, what Larry is saying, they're gun shy.
Yeah, they are guns.
Yeah.
I think it was about 15 to 20 years ago.
Yes.
It's like $500 million that we
Yeah.
had to like allowance for doubtful
Yeah.
accounts.
Yeah.
And they were monitored back then.
Yeah.
They started to become gun shy. There was a period of time they put everything into Medicaid.
Yes.
Yeah.
But the problem was they were gun shy, but none of that repayment that had to happen ever touched their budget, right? Because that's how the city deals with, problems like that. This basically it comes out of the general fund. It doesn't touch their budget. And so while they were gun shy, they had not been injured by the city in terms of their messing up their Medicaid reimbursements. Frankly, I don't know what to do. I mean, I tried everything I could think of, including having people come from the state of Virginia who were experts on Medicaid claiming, doing a 6-month discussion with them on how to do it, how to protect yourself. And it seemed to have very little impact. I mean, unless we actually go in and cut the administrative budget, I don't see what else we can do. And if Paul Timus has any ideas on what will help, it would now's the time to speak, Paul.
Yeah, we've brought up about cutting budgets in the past and it went nowhere.
Yeah.
unfortunately, so that's like something we really can't dangle.
Yeah.
You know, but what I could do on the community board, non-responses, is
Yeah.
I could reach out to my accounting team and have
Yeah.
them follow up with the community board, you know,
Yeah.
unit here, and see if
Yeah.
we can get a little bit more compliance on that, because
Yeah.
to ignore, you know, requests, that's very unprofessional, in my opinion.
Yeah.
My
Yeah, they are a little bit more vulnerable than Department of Education. Although the impact is minuscule as compared to
Yeah.
the problem with DOE.
Financially, it's not any real impact. It's just, you know, like, it's unprofessional, you know, just
Yeah.
ignore everything.
Yeah.
It also smells of something.
Mhm.
Yeah.
I guess because I spend my life in the private sector, not the public sector. The idea of a segment of the business that I ran that would ever tell me when the internal auditor came up with a report like this, that there wasn't an immediate reaction, would the head of that reaction, that unit would be looking at his or her job. That's the ultimate function.
But
Well, that is the other response, yeah.
another thing that troubled me within this report, and I know of 2 instances, it might have been 3, where the agencies decided not to go for recoupment of funds that were spent. Or, you know, like, and I don't understand why.
Well, it's difficult for us to comment on that. I mean, I will say that we were troubled, for example, by EDC's refusal in the ferry audit
Mhm.
to acknowledge certain of the findings. And, you know, we testified before the city council on this. I testified before it. And EDC was also testified for 4 hours or more before the city council. And I'm sure they were grilled on some of those items. But again, you know, it's very difficult in the absence of the mayor's office and this administration requiring them to take action to force it from the outside. You know, one of the things we can do, you know, the tool has limited use, but we can conduct follow-up audits, and we have been considering whether or not a follow-up audit of the Medicaid issue might be worthwhile, for example. I have no doubt over time, once there's a new vendor in place, whether it's this administration or another, that there will be further scrutiny of the ferry system. It just seems like a logical thing. Sometimes when we go back and conduct follow-up audits, we find there are improvements, and we recognize those improvements, and we're pleased to see them. Other times we find that they simply aren't. So it's a mixed bag. And, you know, I will say that our recommendations statuses are also self-reported. So unless we go back and do follow-up audits, we may not know whether or not the recommendations that agencies claim have been implemented have actually been implemented. But when we're choosing what to audit, whether to go back and do a follow-up or to reach into a new program, it's always a judgment call. And it's difficult sometimes to know which way to go. Because there's a lot of money, there's a lot of expenditure out there by New York City, and it's important that we cover broadly as many issues as we can.
I was under the impression that actually there had, but I was not known to at the time, that there had been some improvement in the Medicaid claiming at the DOE. Did you not find that?
We didn't do a follow-up audit.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so if we were to do one, it's possible we would find it. You know, I take your point about gun shy. I was with the Medicaid program, the New York State Medicaid program, at the time when all of those false claims cases were brought, and there were huge recoveries by the federal government against New York City. So I can certainly understand the rationale for people being a little bit gun shy. And in fairness to the community boards, you know, when we talk to them and engage with them, one of the things they regularly point out is that they were very under-resourced. They have big roles and very little budgets and very few people to assist them to carry out their tasks. So, you know.
That's picayune compared to, that's regrettable, because if you have that many organizations, you know, at least 1 or 2 of them are going to be doing bad things.
Yeah.
But the bad things there are a rounding error compared to some of this big stuff.
Yeah.
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 And if that's what I find disturbing is that this audit committee, having seen these reports, can't have any activity that it wants to provoke.
So I have a question related to that, which is, so there's this new, Office of Risk Management and Compliance that the mayor is setting up. Is that likely to improve the situation at all? I mean, it at least gives the mayor's office some kind of centralized overview of where the agencies are, misperforming or whatever. I mean, or is that just really more oriented toward IT risk? Is there hope for this for this entity? And on top of that, let me ask, do we as the audit committee have any standing to, issue our own press release that says, we're bothered by a bunch of this stuff?
You put your finger on it.
Well, we will be hearing from that organization later on the agenda.
Right.
So, that's a great question, but we'll ask it later on rather than at this point.
Okay.
I have to say, almost in terms of the Department of Education, once again, these services will be provided, they're mandated. And that's good because, you don't want children and students who need those services to suffer. But then, there are the rest of the students there as well. And if you attempt to make a budget cut, it's a difficult thing to do because, and once again, you're injuring, you're basically injuring students, not the people who should at least be attempting to do Medicaid claiming. So it's a tough situation.
I wasn't suggesting reduction. All I'm suggesting is a couple of well-placed discharges has a beneficial impact.
Yeah.
Audit reports. I have
No, I hear you.
experience in the public sector, but I can tell you where I have either run a business or had audit committee reports. If I got something like this in the private sector, there would be heads rolling. And if we didn't do it, we'd be criticized by the shareholder population.
Mm-hmm. But I would actually suggest, if at all possible, to do a more recent audit, because again, I have heard that they got better at it, that they had been claiming, 2 or 5 million instead of the 80 or 90 million they were entitled to. And I heard that they had made progress. So I would.
Yeah, we'd be more than happy to consider that.
Yeah.
Focus on the Board of Ed because I have a fond spot. I was the first chairman of the audit committee of the Board of Ed. So I'm a product of that system. But I mean, generally speaking, the idea that there are bad audit reports that come out and there isn't some discipline or authority that really makes it happen.
Yeah.
We've gone over like high level things, but does anybody have any specific questions about some of the individual audits? Because I know I have a couple. All right, one of the comments is like, why are, like the death match? And like, why are some of the pension plans against that, especially since Pfizer runs their payrolls? If we did it universally, just Pfizer doing it.
I don't know if my staff want to comment on that. I mean, looking at the results of the responses, I don't think it was uniform reluctance to do it. I think there were concerns there was some reluctance to collect affidavits.
Yeah, like,
Yeah.
like, are they look, I mean, they're mainly looking out for their members as opposed to the pension plans.
Yeah.
That's one issue. And the other issue I have is the welfare funds. Like, when you look at, like, and I know historically, some of the welfare funds don't submit audited financial statements. Some of them are very top heavy. Some of them have large reserves. And like we, meaning the audit committee, has even talked about why not combine all the welfare funds into one?
Yeah, I think the questions came up last time about the welfare funds, and I indicated that we were considering doing individual audits of funds with indicators of risk, and that's something that we continue to consider. I will say that in the recent round, we had one success. I don't know, Feggy, if you want to report on that, but OLR was asked to take action, and they did, against one of the funds who had not done what they were requested to do. Feggy, do you want to speak about that a little bit?
It was a little bit unusual. OLR worked with us to require OPOA to take some action against the board to ensure that the administrative expenses would be lower, benefit expenses would be paid out higher.
Right. So, you know, in many instances, like with everything else, OLR is the oversight agency ostensibly over the welfare funds. So if OLR is willing to take action based on the analysis that we report and the identified risks, then there's much greater chance that there will be improvement, right? And we're really pleased to see that in this case, there was action taken. So hopefully it's the beginning of a new trend.
Well, I hope so.
No, again, my personal experience is that these funds of money which get managed tend to be honeypots of little benefits that are made available to the people who control the allocation of money. And those are very pernicious. Because they ultimately show up in the returns.
Does anybody else have any specific questions about one of the audits mentioned in this report, or even overall?
Well, let me ask this question. Is there anything we can do as an audit committee that you can wind us up to do remark of health results that you want to obtain?
And I think that, you know, this question comes up more than once. I'm not actually familiar with the audit committee's authorities. So that's a question I'd have to ask first. What is the range of your authority? But I don't believe you need us to G you up. Could you not call people to give testimony without us? You know, our results are there. They're reported in the public domain, the recommendations and the tracking of recommendations goes on. You know, there's negative press in many instances, and it seems to me that if an agency is willing, even in the face of negative press, and to take any action, it's difficult to see what would move them. I don't know, Marjorie, if you have any comments on that. This is kind of your realm now, more than the city comptrollers, right? Our limits, our authority is very limited, right? It's one of the truisms of the charter. You know, we can't force change. We can ask for it. We can, you know, when the press is involved, one hopes that there's a greater chance of change. And when we do see change, we're very happy. You know, And we do see a lot of change, I must say, even though it's not uniform, there is a great deal. When 67% respond that they agree with the recommendations and 56% have in fact implemented them, that's a reasonably good response. And then you get these additional things like the EDC audit, where fair change has occurred almost immediately in response to the report. And this recent, a little toe in the water from OLR working with us to encourage change is also positive.
I guess what concerns me on that front is that this is so dependent on, I mean, it's so political, right? Like certainly if there have been certainly been times when there's tension politically that just leads to agencies to, you know, refusing to do anything. And there's kind of no overriding enforcement of some level of accountability. In other words, like if there's no, it comes down to accountability and the incentives of the people in these agencies about whether, you know, what is the reward to them for addressing issues in audits or cooperating with the audits versus what is their, you know, what are the decision makers' own personal stake in, you know, protecting themselves or protecting some political position or something. And I don't know how you kind of break through that. I mean, obviously a lot of this stuff is not political, but there is always that kind of bottom line about how far can any entity go in ensuring that, you know, people are kind of
I believe
run things accountably.
I believe this is something that we as an audit committee have to discuss amongst ourselves as to what we could do going forward.
Can I just say something to Marcia, because I have been auditing for a very long time, and like a dinosaur, and one of the things that you mentioned, things are political, you know, and I've been through many different administrations, and what I have found that when we do an audit, and our audits are independent of any political being, that even if publicly the agencies may not want to agree, when you do go back, you do find that they have made change, because the people that are doing the work are looking to improve and are looking to do the right thing. So we're talking about people to people, and they do want to do the right thing. Nobody wants to waste their time. So I'm gratified by that. And that's why I guess I'm still doing this for so long, because there is a purpose for what we're doing, and it's a good purpose. Okay.
Yeah, I
It
mean,
made me feel better, Faggy. Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
you know, I noted that when we go back for recommendations, even often they say, no, they won't implement, but we found they were implemented. And I think what Faggy is saying is correct. We are more aligned, notwithstanding the fact that we're oversight, we are more aligned with agency staff than perhaps folks acknowledge, right? I've been long on the other side, running internal audit shops and vendor audit shops and being subject to oversight. Nobody really, a lot depends on the commissioner of the agency. Many commissioners will, even if their staff aren't on board, will say, yeah, we're going to make this change. It's important we go forward. If a commissioner is not willing to do that, it depends. You know, some staff won't, some will. But by and large, I think civil servants want to do the right thing. They want to succeed. They want their programs to succeed. And we are attempting to work more collaboratively with them. We are, for example, saying to our staff, listen, if an agency tells you a particular recommendation isn't feasible, have the conversation. If this isn't feasible, what would be feasible? Why isn't it feasible? Is there some other action you can take that would help make a change, right? We're in a time frame when everybody's resources are tight. Many agencies have significant vacancies, including ourselves. So it's important that the staff also respond to that and engage with auditees as though we do in fact have aligned interests rather than enemies. And so that's something we're working on. It's a significant change. It will take time. But I am hopeful, and I do get reports from my colleagues in the agencies that they are seeing changes amongst the auditors. And I think the auditors are happy by and large to engage on that level rather than carry a hammer, right? So it's a different approach across the board. Whether or not it will prove fruitful over time is difficult to say today, but we're hopeful and we'll continue on that track in the hope that it is going to bear fruit.
Thank you for that comment, because I felt that that was needed at this point. About, the staff will implement, even though the agency might say no.
Well, what can we do as an audit committee to further this point, this
Hmm.
way? we do?
Well, I would have a request then, and I don't know how a request goes this way. But again, on the DOE Medicaid issue, I was told after I left that there had been improvement and that there was more claiming being done. And I suspect Paul can grab that data for us and see if that's true. And I'm wondering if we can have a follow-up audit to see if, I think they said something like there were 25 recommendations out of 30 they would do. And let's just see if they actually have improved. Because
Yeah.
again, I heard that. So, I hope springs eternal.
Well, we're happy to make that recommendation and put it on the list. And, we're very happy when we find that improvement has been made. So let's see
Yeah.
what we can find out.
Yeah.
Other questions or comments? Any more before I thank them for coming before us in this fine presentation this morning?
My only comment is that was a really good discussion, and I made me very, very pleased to be on the audit committee.
No, we'll have a discussion amongst committee members as to what we could do going forward.
Great. Thank you so very much.
But thanks.
Thank you.
Hi, Ed. Hi, Faggy. Have a good summer.
Thank you. Same to you.
Go
Nice to
back
see
with both of them a
you.
long
Bye.
time.
Bye, Mike.
Bye all.
Bye.
Bye.
Okay, that concludes the open session. I'd like to have a motion to go into executive session.
So
Just
moved.
before we hang on, just before we do that, can I ask Paul Timus if he could send over some data to us on their claiming, because I do actually think that there was improvement, and that would be a good thing to know.
Okay,
So
I'll follow up on that. Absolutely.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it, Paul.
Okay, so we have a motion to go into executive session. Kat,
Yes, I will pause. We're live.
You want a
Okay, thank
motion to turn now, Mike?
yeah, we're back into the open session. If there's no other business before us, any motion to adjourn?
I so
Here.
moved.
I second.
Okay, thank you.